Hi, dancers. Today we are talking with Lyssa Wopat, a former professional ballet dancer turned certified mental performance consultant. She has a master's degree in sport and performance psychology and is the founder of Performentality, where she uses mental skills training to help dancers dance to their potential more consistently, improve and grow in skill level, and increase enjoyment in dance to bolster their career longevity. And today I'm just so excited to be talking with you because, as many of you guys know, I am a ballet injury prevention enthusiast. And having been a professional dancer myself, I've gone through a lot of highs and lows with stress and injuries. And we just really want to talk to you guys today about the effects and the connection between high stress levels and injuries occurring in the ballet industry. And even if you're not a professional dancer, how this relationship between stress and ballet is so highly correlated to the development of injuries.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Veronica. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad to be a part of this conversation. I think injury prevention is starting to be talked about more from a physical perspective. Certainly that needs to keep happening in terms of cross-training and physical therapy and all of those kinds of things. But I think it's kind of rarely talked about from the mental aspects that might increase stress, and even some of the physical aspects that increase stress, and how we might look at navigating that so that we can mitigate, to some extent at least, the injury risk for dancers, which is fairly common. Most dancers at some point in their career usually have some kind of injury, whether it's, minor, major, acute, chronic, so on and so forth.
Right. And I know that, we had both talked about a study that was done in 2024, and that this study was monitoring 3 professional ballet companies, and 97% of them reported at least one injury during that season. I mean, that's pretty wild. And then they linked up that 28% of those injuries were mental health. They all had mental health issues during that season. So that's just, one season. And those numbers are pretty high. I mean, 97% were injured and 28% had mental health issues. And I would just love to hear more of your thoughts on the mental health side of all of that and the stress overload side.
Totally. Yeah. So when we think about, from a sport and performance psychology perspective and getting through, the demands of a season, I think there's kind of some different ways to think about stress, and the types of stress that you might be experiencing. I think about sort of acute stress, so momentary, in the moment kinds of stress, and things that make you more stressed, like certain steps, choreography, whatever that might be, as well as more chronic stress, which could be a buildup of all of those small moments. It could be, life things getting, in the way, or not in the way, but obviously a part of your life. We all have stressors that are not part of dance too. And how do we deal with those various types of stress so that we can, mitigate the stress itself, and also mitigate the injury risk that comes with that stress, or those higher levels of stress, whether they are acute or chronic. So yeah, I mean, it would depend a little bit, I think, what a dancer is going through in terms of whether it is turning into chronic stress, which we usually think of as overtraining syndrome, burnout, those kinds of things, or if it's really at that moment seems to be more of a momentary, in the moment stress response to something that's occurring in the studio, for example.
Yeah. And I would say that, I mean, I know for me personally, I grew up with a lot of long-term stress. So when those smaller instances that produced acute stressors in the dance classroom for me, I would be standing at the end of a bar, for example, and I literally would start to feel myself breathe heavier. My heart rate would pick up, my whole body would tense up. And I think that when you are at that chronic level of stress, just like a constant overload, smaller things in the classroom are going to trigger that like fight or flight response. So then you're just, it's really hard to even get out of that, like that loop. You're almost like stuck in a loop. It's like, oh, you made one mistake in a Sandu combination. Now the world's going to end. Or, oh my gosh,
Right.
I'm standing at the end of the bar. If I screw up, everyone behind me is going to screw up. So the world is like on my shoulders at this very moment. So would you, I guess, speak on how do you help dancers that are dealing with, like, you have no idea what they're dealing with in their home life, what teachers they've been exposed to, what other personal factors they may be going through with like relationships or, even eating habits. But how do you help those dancers who are sitting at that constant like stress overload at a baseline, and then they just have these, they can't even get through class without having multiple like incidences of acute stress attacks, essentially?
Yeah, I think, before I even dive into that, one of the important things to kind of highlight is what kind of professional support might someone be seeking, or who would be the best person to support that individual. And that's kind of dependent on what that person is experiencing, like all of those factors that you're mentioning, what their home life is like, what their personal life is like, so many different pieces. And certainly if there's any mental health challenges. So for a lot of those things, a therapist or a psychologist would be a really great person to help. As far as my side of things, it's pretty focused in the dance world. And when we notice that there are in the field, we call them life disruptions. I don't love that phrase, but if their life is being quote unquote disrupted in other ways, that is something that maybe a therapist or a psychologist would want to help that person through. But from my side of things, if it is becoming more of a chronic stress response, so towards that burnout side of things, first, we kind of look at what we can do to try to activate the opposite side of the nervous system. So there's the stress response side, which is our sympathetic nervous system. And then we have what people typically call the rest and digest side of your nervous system, which is your parasympathetic nervous system. When we're trying to, even in momentary stress, but also in a more chronic stress, we have that stress response activated too much for too much of the time. So it's at high levels more of the time than it needs to be. And so we're looking at what can we do to lower that activation, the stress response activation, and actually boost the other side, that rest and digest side. So we're looking at things like sleep. What does that look like? Because that is one of our major natural recovery processes as a human. What is the quantity and the quality of that sleep, and how can we bolster that? What other kinds of relaxation exercises or non-sleep deep rest exercises like meditation or mindfulness-based exercises can we do to get that rest and digest side of the nervous system activated more frequently, so that we're not, high levels of stress hormones all the time, which once that's happening, we do see a lot of wear and tear physically, mentally, emotionally, kind of through all different parts of a human. So chronically, that's probably where it would be starting first, because we really want to get that person to a healthier baseline. But if there are these other concerns going on where it would make sense that their stress response is activated, and it's something that I am not equipped to help with, I would definitely refer that person to a therapist or a psychologist to help them work through those, bigger stressors. Because, to tell you, oh no, we're going to try to kickstart that other side when it would make sense for a person to be stressed, I don't want to do that either.
Yeah. And I think, so something that I think is interesting about the dance population or ballet world in general, though, is that, would you agree that most perfectionist dancers are probably not going to admit to themselves or even to their teachers or other people that they even require that assistance mentally, so that they can get to that next level? Because I know that, even environmentally, we feel the pressure. And I think you mentioned it somewhere here, that teachers almost praise you for being able to push through this without asking for help. There's a lot of like, oh, you did that like you pushed through that injury. You didn't feel that pain. Good job. That you did not acknowledge that your body is signaling
Right.
you to stop. And that same thing goes for the mental toughness side, where I know that I had been almost shamed into feeling like, oh my gosh, you shouldn't have that problem.
Right.
You just need to be a ballet dancer and tough it up like the rest of us, because I went through this too.
Yeah. Yeah. The environment is so important. I'm seeing trends towards the right direction, in my opinion, of healthier spaces and resources being offered more frequently and things like that. But I don't think we're quite where ideally we would want to be in that way. So, when we have that sort of pressure to continue when either in our body we know we shouldn't, or we've been told by a doctor or a physical therapist that we shouldn't be pushing through, that pressure sometimes seems to override what we know, either physically in ourselves or what we know from a professional giving us their professional advice or opinion. And that's really hard to kind of override that pressure sometimes for a lot of people. And there's so many different reasons for this. And when I've posted about things like this, I get comments on those posts about, what if I lose my contracts? If I do something like that, what if I'm not paid? Like, this is my job. If I don't dance, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if we think about sort of like the broader environment and organizations and how all of this is structured, it's not really structured to support dancers in that way. And it's not structured currently for dancers to feel like they can or should speak up.
Right.
And still, like, my advice would be, if you want to dance long term, or if you just want to be a healthy human long term, what's the choice here to push or not to push? What makes the most sense long term, not just today or even this month or year?
Yeah.
But it's so hard to make that decision for so many different reasons. Yeah, it's so tough.
Yeah.
And so if we can find ways to, in a big way, change how the dance world is structured, but even in a smaller way, teachers and directors and staff understand how best to support their dancers and why it's actually in their best interest too to do that. I think we might see some positive changes kind of trickle down into how dancers take care of themselves too. But it's a big task, but something we're working on in this world.
Yeah, because if they're not in a healthy environment mentally, like we said, they're not going to take care of themselves and prioritize recovery or strength training or any kind of, work on their physical side of things. They're going to think that they're just not getting it right. And that can often lead to that burnout, and then people leaving the dance field altogether because they feel like they have imposter syndrome, where, oh, well, I couldn't do it as well as my teacher is expecting me, so I don't belong here anymore. But in reality, it's like those extrinsic pressures that have now pushed that person out. Not that they were doing anything wrong, except for maybe just not taking care of themselves enough in that moment and having the support that they needed. And I guess this is where the online world has kind of opened some doors for a lot of people who have had to stay silent or have been in really toxic environments like studios or schools or companies, where if you're not getting the support that you need right there in person, then you do have the capability to reach out to somebody like you for, the mental health side of things, or me for the physical health side of learning how to take care and recover with your body. These are now options that we have in this time period, which is amazing that we have that. Something that I would love for you to speak on is those dancers who are kind of trapped in studios with only that teacher influence or those peer influences that aren't giving that social support and having those open conversations. There are so many younger dancers in those prime years of like being 10 to 16, where they're just like trying to develop a sense of like what their body is. They wake up in a new body every day. Some days they're like, oh, my arabesque is amazing. the next day it's like, oh, I just had a growth spurt and now I can't even get my leg up to 45,
Mhm.
and I deal with this on the physical level with trying to help them understand that there's fluctuation in their growth and that your arabesque and your flexibility, everything's going to change as you continue to
Yeah.
grow and you dance.
Mhm.
But what is your best advice to these dancers who are going through this in those younger years, who do not have the support and
Yeah.
maybe not even financial ability to, book an appointment with us?
Sure. Yeah. I think the first thing my mind goes to from my perspective as, a certified mental performance consultant and mental skills training, and from that lens, there are things we can do to work with that dancer to help them build the coping skills to navigate stress in a more effective and healthier way, so that hopefully they're not as stressed and their nervous system is healthier, but also they're mitigating that injury risk that we were talking about earlier. But at the same time, I do think it's just important, before we even delve into what that looks like from a mental skills perspective, I do think it's important to kind of acknowledge that environmental component that have been talking about. If we jump directly into the skills, that kind of tells the dancer, this is your fault. Like, you have to figure out how to navigate this because you're the one that's
Mm,
so stressed when, everyone around you doesn't look stressed, which is probably not even the case, right? They're probably
yeah.
stressed too. So I really always want to make it clear to those dancers that we're giving you these skills, if that's the path we want to go, so that you can feel healthier and safer and navigate that stress in a more effective and efficient way, not because you're the problem and because you're doing this in a way that's stressing you out. The environment itself is a factor here. And so if it's possible for that dancer, if it truly is the environment, go somewhere else or remove themselves, or even if it's possible, depending on the environment, to have a conversation with whoever is appropriate to have a conversation with, that might be something to explore. If that's not an option and we really are left with, we are here. I've had
Hmm.
dancers who I signed my contract, I cannot back out at
Yeah.
this point. What do I do? Then we're looking at, okay, how are we navigating this in a way that's going to help you get through it the healthiest way we
Yeah.
can? And I'm not talking about really unsafe environments. That's a different conversation,
Yeah.
I think. But from that mental skills perspective, then we're saying, okay, what are our stressors? Where are we getting the most stressed? Is it in the way that we are seeing and perceiving different situations? Like, for instance, if I'm casted in a certain way and I'm looking at that as they hate me, or they think I suck and that's why I'm in this role again, or whatever that thing might be. Maybe there is something there, but that might not be the most helpful way to appraise that situation, to assess it. So what's going on in their heads? What's going on in their bodies? What kinds of things are stressing them out in their schedules? And is there a way to kind of mitigate that? So we're kind of looking at, where is the stress coming from? What's the origin of the stress? So that we can
Hmm.
figure out what mental skills might best help that person navigate where that stress is coming from. And hopefully that results in lower stress response, lower injuries, or lower amounts of injuries, and all of that.
Yeah. And then I know you had talked about skills that would help actually reduce that stress, especially for acute stress. Would you like to
Mm-hmm.
talk about a little bit more on those, which would be maybe helpful for somebody who doesn't have, the ability to go out and have that one-on-one support with you?
Yeah, sure. So as far as the acute stressors go, there are so many different ways and specific techniques to move through stress. So what I'm going to talk about here is not you have two options and you have to pick one of the
Yeah.
two. There are so many, and that's why I do love one-on-one work, is because I can get to know the person and their
Yeah.
situation, the environment they're in, and that way we can kind of tailor the interventions to what works best for them. But of course, I understand that's not everyone has the ability to do that, the time, the money, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go through two today, but if you're listening and you're either I don't understand or I don't think these are going to work for me, reach out, because we can try to figure out at least a short little something that we could talk about. But if it's coming from sort of the mental aspect of, when I'm assessing situations, I get stressed. So let me even just break that down for a second. oftentimes situations themselves are pretty objective. They're factual. They are what they are. An example I like to use a lot, particularly from my personal perspective, I never liked turning as a dancer. And it always
Me
stressed me out.
too.
Really? Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
I
I
have
often
weird turning anxiety. Like,
yes. When I say this, I always have dancers in the room that are like, yes, thank you. Okay, so yeah, with turns, if a teacher were to give, for me, honestly, any turn combination, but particularly one that has a lot of turns in it, that situation, it's a turning combination. If I ask any dancer in the room, did the teacher give a turn combination? Everyone's going to say yes. It's objective, it's factual. What happens after that in all of our brains, we're taking in this information that we're seeing and hearing and, through all of our senses, and our brain has to try to make sense of it. Like, what does all of this information mean for me? That moment where it's deciding, what does this mean for me? That's where we usually end up either heightening that stress response or perhaps staying a little, not necessarily low, but where it was before. So for me, when a teacher gives a turn combination, my brain goes, oh no, this is an opportunity for me to make a mistake. I'm going to mess up. Everyone's going to see it. And all of a sudden my stress response goes right up through the roof, because now I'm seeing this combination as a threat to me. This is an opportunity for everyone to see me mess up. They're going to think I'm not good. My confidence is, all the way in the basement. And so then everything that follows after that is impacted by that stress response. My neuromuscular control goes down. My attention goes, not where I want it to be. So we usually say it's not task relevant. I'm now focusing on my nerves and who's watching and all of these kinds of things. And when those things happen, we don't dance as well, and we set ourselves up for a higher injury risk in that situation as well. So we're looking at that moment of perception, that moment of what does this mean for me? And for me, turns, I'm not going to believe if I just like, you got this, like, you're good at turns. Like, that would never be something I would believe. But I could say, you know what, this is going to be hard for me, but I'm going to learn something from it. Like, I'm going to get some information from this. And maybe on the left, I'll use that information and see what happens on the left. And suddenly that is really not so threatening or scary of a way to approach it. And it's honest. Like, I do think it's going to be difficult for me, but there's a positive aspect to this. There's something I'm going to get from it. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm gonna gain something that is going to help me improve. Yeah, we can kind of see how that sort of trickles down the links of how does that affect the way that I'm feeling physically and emotionally, and how does that affect my dancing, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's a great mental reframe, and it makes you look at yourself almost objectively in that scenario where you're dissecting your own movement and saying, okay, what do I need to work on now outside of the classroom after this turn combination? Okay, I did really great on the tombe pas de bourrée. My preparation was correct, but then I pushed really hard on the turn, and then, the landing was not able to land. That you can get information, like you said, out of that combination that you're doing, and look at it as a self-analysis rather than a self-critique. Because and I think actually it's funny, because when I started my business years ago, the idea of recording myself and putting it online made me want to just like curl up in a ball. It was a terrifying idea. I was like, what am I doing? Why am I even doing this? But it was funny because there was some reframing that must have happened in my head. I have no idea how, but I got to the point where I would watch myself and I would realize the things that I was doing wrong, and then be able to go back and say, oh, I know that I'm doing that because I've watched other clients and I've watched patients do this. And I know that that movement indicates that my gluteus medius is weak. And so if I strengthen that up, then I can go back and try that combination again. And maybe I won't fall out that way anymore. And so it just gave me this like completely different perspective of dancing that was so really freeing for me now. I wish I had that earlier, but I look at myself as a case study versus oh, that's me messing up on camera. I just,
Right.
oh, okay. And now I'm at the point where I'm comfortable enough that I'm okay with not doing a combination perfect. So I'll point out, like, hey guys, if you're having this problem, like I'm doing right now, I've
Mm-hmm.
gone through a major surgery in the past year and I can't even get
Mm.
to a full relevant on my left foot still. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with that right now because I know that if I put the pressure on myself to go into class and do a million releves, do pirouettes on that side, put
Right.
that pressure on myself, I'm going to be really, really stressed out.
Yeah.
And then my surgical site is not going to heal properly. And I'm not going to end up being able to ever get back long term, like you were saying,
Right.
before. The long
Mm-hmm.
term goal is for me to go back to performing and get on point again, just recreationally.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be able to do that if I stress myself out in the now and put really unrealistic pressures on myself when I actually
Mm-hmm.
walk into the classroom.
Yeah.
I'm not using it as an opportunity to practice. I'm walking in there thinking I have to be perfect performance.
Right. 100%. Yeah. It's a completely different way to look at yourself and to look at your dancing. And one other thing that you did that I really loved when you started speaking was, and I know this was just an example, but you said something like, I did the tombe pas de bourrée well, and the preparation was good, and like that kind of thing. And that way to look at your dancing, we almost never do that. Most of the dancers I've worked with really don't do that very often, identify what's going well. More
Yeah,
often than not, our brains as humans like to find negative things, because evolutionarily, if it's bad, it's unsafe. And if it's fine, or it's just neutral, or it's good, it's safe. Like I don't have to pay attention to it. The sky is blue, that's normal. Okay, that's fine. Right. Or,
yeah,
we got dinner today. Yay. I don't have to worry about that. But when something's bad, there's a bear, there's a fire, there isn't food for dinner. We have to pay attention to that because we have to do something about it. And that stress
right.
response goes up. We've carried that into, I'm getting really specific in dance, but we tend to hold on to our corrections, our weaknesses. What's wrong? What do I need to fix? What are all the things that I'm not doing well? And very rarely do we ever look at, oh, you know what? I'm actually pretty good at this. This thing got better today. All of those positive aspects that certainly exist in anyone's dancing.
Yeah,
We just don't ever look for them because they're quote unquote not important. We don't need to fix them. They already are where we want them to be, or they're positive things. So we don't focus on
right,
them. But that creates
right.
such a imbalanced perception of your dancing if you're always thinking what's wrong, what's bad,
It is because when you look at if you take a whole string of a combination and you really do look at each component of that combination, you're probably going to realize that 8 out of the 10 things that you did in that combination were actually really good and noteworthy things that you had beautiful characteristics with.
Mhm.
But then those 2 things out of the 10, that's where you fell apart or there's room to work on,
Mhm.
but we focus on that.
Yeah. And I mean, that can, in and of itself, has an effect on your confidence, has an effect on your stress levels, more likely than not. And so on. If we keep connecting this back to injury risk and stress, certainly, the more we think that way, the more negatively we're generally thinking about ourselves as dancers, and our abilities, and that, how that's linked to so many different things: confidence, motivation, stress. And we can run down a whole list of things that could
Yeah.
impact.
I read a quote once and I have no idea who it was by. So I cannot give you that. But I remember reading this quote that went something like, the direction of your thoughts will end you in the direction that you're headed. So, like, if you're
Mm,
having negative thoughts, if you're taking these, if you're taking more moments than you are positive in your dance class, you're going to keep headed in that direction, regardless of what you're doing outside of the dance classroom. If you're going and doing
mm,
a bunch of cross training, if you're doing all these other things, but if your thoughts are still headed in that direction of being negative
mhm.
constantly, you're going to still head in that direction.
Yeah. Your brain loves patterns and repetition, which is a great thing from a dance perspective in terms of like doing the same, especially in a ballet class where it's usually structured very similarly. But when we think about it from sort of that mental perspective and the self-talk perspective, the things that we repeat to ourselves in terms of our self-talk, whether consciously or sort of in the back of like, not, we don't notice, we're not aware of it, we kind of create like ruts in our brain. If we think about like a car in the mud, it's like spinning that wheel deeper and deeper and deeper. And those things often become beliefs. If we aren't aware that they're happening, they kind of just happen and we keep on, keep spinning that wheel in the mud. But the important thing to remember, to know, is that that doesn't have to be the case forever. If we're able to kind of recognize what those thoughts are, when they happen, or when they happen most frequently, all of those details, we're more able to recognize them when they pop up in the moment and figure out, okay, that is a thought I have a lot, or a similar, pattern or belief that I've started to instill. How can I get my wheel out of the mud and back onto the road and create a different pattern, a different thing for my brain to hold on to, a different belief? So instead of believing I can't do this, maybe it's, I'm not there yet. And that might be, it's not overly positive, but it also leaves room for the possibility that, I could get there if I keep, thinking about this and keep working on this in different ways and keep taking my mistakes as information and my corrections and see if I can apply them in a way that, the self-talk and the belief side of things is so powerful. And if we don't pay attention to it and we're not able to catch those thoughts and really think about what's happening in our brain, it will run on its own. Like it'll do its thing, but it might not be helpful for you, whatever it's doing automatically.
So I know that you had talked about like 2 skill sets essentially that people could take away. And we really hit on that reframing, I feel like, so well. And I think that is going to be a really valuable thing to help a lot of dancers take away from this talk today. And I would just love to hear what the other skill set is then that you were going to talk about too.
Yeah, absolutely. This one always sounds really simple to people, and it's a little cliche in terms of, just what people often say to people that are stressed or anxious. And that is a breathing strategy. But the reason that we do this is because oftentimes when we are stressed, and this is, again, more of that acute stress that we're talking about, at least in this moment, but when we're stressed, we breathe more shallowly. Our heart rate is usually higher. There's all kinds of physiological things that are going on when that stress response is activated. And so breathing exercises are designed to activate that other side of the nervous system that we were talking about earlier, that rest and digest response. So there's a myriad of different breathing exercises available. 2 of my favorites are ratio breathing, which is inhale for 4, exhale for 8. Inhale 4, exhale 8, or 5, 10, 6, 12. I don't usually go much higher than that because it gets really difficult to do. But that longer exhale kind of signaling to your body and your brain, you are safe. This danger is not, this pirouette combination, more likely than not, is not real danger like a fire or a bear. We can kind of calm that nervous system down a little bit. And then that might provide the ability for you to even use a reframe, like, okay, my body's a little bit more calm. How can I think about this differently? Another one of those breathing strategies is box breathing. So for that one, you're nodding. I know so many people love this
I
one
do
and know
box
it.
breathing all the time.
Yes.
That's definitely, I love box breathing. In fact, I integrate it into my exercises a lot of the time for people who are in pain. It's just a great pain regulator.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one, I mean, you know it well, it seems, but inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4. And you just repeat that. And I'm sort of tracing a box every time I say one of those things on the screen. But if you're listening, inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4. And again, that's sort of just trying to lower that stress response activation and maybe even start a little bit more of that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest side a little bit more, just to signal to your brain and your body that you are okay. Like the thing that feels threatening and scary here is not a literal threat to life or literal danger here. And again, if we're able to mitigate that stress or navigate it, not that it's going to go from 10 to 0 even, but 10 to 7 maybe, or something like that, we are lowering the risk of injury by lowering that stress response activation in that way. And there are longer ways, if you engage in a breathing exercise for 10 or 15 minutes or something like that, that can get you into a deeper level of relaxation that might even help something like more chronic stress, where we're just always elevated. If we're able to kind of get into that lowered stress response place more frequently, that's a possibility. But usually we train these breathing strategies increasingly more stressful environments. So starting perhaps at home, in your room, whatever the safe place is for you, for 3 to 5 minutes, maybe up to 10 if you have the time to do that. And then once you're kind of recognizing, you know what, this is calming my body in this environment. Okay, maybe we're now at the studio, but just sitting and stretching or something. Now trying this. Am I still able to kind of key into that? Okay, yes. Now we're going to walk it into the studio. Maybe you can't do 3 to 5 minutes anymore, but maybe you can take 5 breaths while you're waiting for another group to go across the floor or something like that. And slowly kind of inching it up and continuously proving to yourself, this helps me relax. Again, not 10 to 0, but it helps me kind of take that stress response down a notch.
Yeah. And I love something that you mentioned was how when you are stressed, your breath work in general becomes shallower. So when you have shallow breath and you're breathing from that upper part of your respiratory system in your chest, you're not getting those deep oxygen rich breaths that your muscles need to actually regenerate, get through a combination, and stay, active throughout your class, which then again leads into that injury risk. If you're not getting oxygen rich breaths, you have those shallow anxiety ridden breaths that are up in your chest, you're not using your core properly either. So it physically changes the way you'll stand. You're going to often see dancers who do have a lot of that with that rib cage flaring, where you get corrected for, oh, your ribs are flaring. And if you're somebody who's hearing this, you might think, well, I do that a lot. I get that correction a lot. And you're not using your breath properly, which, that is going to cause a physical effect on your body. And that's one of the first things that I always start with when I get a new client is breath work, because so often my dancers, they come to me and they're breathing from the chest, and they have this, it changes their spinal alignment completely. And so they're not even able to properly recruit their core.
Yeah.
But I also think an amazing point that you just made, and I just want to drive it home, is that if you're standing on the sidelines, do some breathing exercises, because it will also allow you to internalize the combination and what's going on in your own body. If you feel pain, anything like that, versus you looking at the person that's going across the floor. And then instead of focusing on the combination or your breath or anything that you may be feeling in your body that may be off, you're now focusing on the person that's going across the classroom and comparing yourself to that person, which is then going to increase your anxiety and stress level. And then more likely, you are going to mess up the combination, and then you're more likely to do something like fall out of a jump, land incorrectly, sprain your ankle. All of those things can compile just because you're very externally focused during the class and not focusing internally. So I definitely encourage every single person, like the next class you go take, just try, see what you do. What's your inclination? Do you automatically want to watch them go across the floor and you're not confident in what you're doing? Or can you take that second and just breathe and focus internally, talk yourself through the combination? I remember when I was in college and I made the switch from watching people go across to talking to myself on the sideline. If I talk to myself on the sidelines and I talk the combination through and I close my eyes and I just do that, I was able to actually remember the combination.
Right. Yeah. I still teach ballet a little bit, and I had a colleague who at YGP specifically, but I imagine this could be implemented even in the studio. She always told her dancers, if you're waiting in the wings for your turn and your number to be called, you stand, you do your thing, whatever you want to do, but you're facing away from the stage. So you can't watch the person before you, which, there are some dancers who aren't affected by watching, particularly dancers who sometimes when we compare, if it's downward comparison where we're comparing and we're like, oh, you know what? Like I do pretty well when I look at this person. I think I'm going to be fine. that kind of thing. That could actually make someone more confident. But for a lot of us, when we're watching the people before us, we're like, oh my gosh, they're so good. Especially if they're doing your variation, like, oh my gosh, like you're about to go on stage to do the same thing. There's a lot of comparison that happens there. That upward comparison where we're watching and we're going, oh my gosh, they're so much better than me, or they're so much better at this thing that I am, and they're going to, I'm going to mess up, or all of those thoughts that can come from that. So I love that idea of kind of, noticing what do you do, like you said, sort of being really self-aware, what's actually happening in this when I'm standing on the side or when I'm waiting for my group to go, and what might be a more helpful way of utilizing that time to make me feel more confident, more ready, more calm, any of those things that feel better for you as a dancer, and hopefully also reduce that stress too at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. So I think the last thing I would love to talk about is just contrasting like what a mentally healthy dancer looks like versus that mentally unhealthy dancer. And I know I threw a few things out, and I just we can like go topic by topic and go through like the healthy side of things and then unhealthy. And I'll speak on like the physical. If you'd like to start us off with just kind of talking about what those mental aspects look like.
Sure. Yeah. So again, coming at this from that sort of mental skills perspective, less than like when we say mental health, sometimes that incorporates some other pieces that I'm not qualified to speak on. But when I think about this from sort of a CMPC perspective or a mental skills perspective, and I'm sure this won't be comprehensive, but some of the big things, where is your focus? Is it on controllable things or uncontrollable things? And that in and of itself, you're probably going to notice the uncontrollable factors. So what is the teacher saying, doing, thinking? What are your peers doing, saying, and thinking? What is the actual environment like? The floor, is it slippery? The lights? What is the casting? All of these uncontrollable factors, you're probably going to notice them. But if we're placing our focus on them, we're spending a lot of energy on something that we can't do anything about. So if we notice that, can we put our focus on something that's controllable? Your self-talk, your literal focus, what effort you're putting in, the attitude you're taking, how you are assessing and appraising those situations, as we talked about earlier, all of that good stuff. And that really kind of encompasses a wide range of things. Are you focusing on the dancer that's going before you? All of these little pieces, if we say control the controllables, from a mental skills perspective, that covers so many different aspects that's going to help a dancer dance their best, hopefully be more confident while they're doing it, enjoy their time in the studio more, and generally be kind of a healthier and more effective approach to dancing. So I know that's kind of vague and broad, but one of the best ways that I can kind of encompass so many of the different pieces that can make a dancer mentally more ready and prepared and feel better in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the dancers that I see that are practicing those things like positive self-talk and giving feedback without shaming, or, they're listening to their bodies. So then they are more likely to go out and rest when they need to rest. They're going to integrate like therapeutic strength training or corrective exercises when they see that it is necessary. Like I said, I've noticed that my gluteus medius is really weak when I am doing a turn, so I fall out sideways a lot of the time. Okay, that's, a good indicator that I should probably be working on that exercise. But an unhealthy dancer mentally who is not, internalizing those strategies to have that positive self-talk isn't going to see it that way. They're just going to see I'm bad at pirouettes and I always fall out to the side.
Right.
So, these dancers who are integrating these more positive attributes are going to have that physical strength, less injuries, longer performance careers, and less overall anxiety. I truly, truly believe that it's not a matter of the dancer who's overly confident, but the dancer who's comfortable in their body enough to look at themselves a little bit more objectively, not subjectively based on their negative self-talk.
Yeah. And that's sort of that, when I think of it that way, it kind of in some ways comes back to control the controllables of like, what can I think, say, do to make, myself healthier? Like you were talking about resting when you need to, all of those kinds of things. And then also another aspect that I should mention that is sort of in that realm of control the controllables, but not quite the same as social support, which
Yeah.
is just, there's so much research showing that anyone, not just dancers, that I feel like they have a strong social support system, which can be peers, teachers, parents, family, friends, professionals in this way, who's helping you cross train or train outside of dance, who's helping you with the mental aspects, whether that's a therapist or a CNPC, physical therapist, so many different professionals who's in your circle. And if your circle doesn't look like the way you want it to, what can you do to build that out, or invite people in some way? And that's just another aspect of what make a dancer
Yeah.
mentally.
Yeah. Because I think it's definitely worth noting that, like, you're talking about controllable versus not controllable.
Mm,
Changing your circle is controllable. And it may
mm,
not feel that way a lot of the times, because I've gone through periods where I feel like that.
mhm.
But when I try to really take a step back and look at it from an objective standpoint, I realize that it is definitely controllable. Yeah, so I think this is a great place to end our conversation today. So if you guys want to work with Lyssa on Instagram, you can go and find her at Performentality. So it's actually one word. So it is PERFORM, and then it's Entality LLC. That is her actual Instagram handle. So it's not two separate words. So it's just one word. And I'll make sure that's in the show notes. Or you can go to her website, which again, it's PERFORMENTALITY training.com. And you can schedule a free consult with her at either of those places, or you can go to the link on Instagram and click request a consult, and it will send you to her website so you can book with her. And if you're at a company or a school or a studio and you're interested in a mental skills workshop, make sure you reach out to her on her website or on Instagram. And if you're somebody who is seeking help with the injury prevention, physical, and corrective side of these things that we have talked about today, then make sure you reach out to me on veronicakballet.com. And you can also find me at Veronica K Platform on my Instagram. So again, Lyssa, thank you so much for joining me today. I really felt like this was such a constructive and beneficial talk. And I really hope that people leave this conversation feeling like they're at least given one new thing that they can maybe try in their dance class, and make them feel a little bit stronger and more confident with what they're doing, and not feeling such an outsider that they're always getting it wrong.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Veronica. I think it's an important conversation and one that's not had very often. So I'm really glad that we were able to chat about it today.
That's it for today's episode on stress and ballet injuries. Remember, your body and mind are deeply connected. Taking care of both is essential for safe, sustainable dancing. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you'll join me again for our next episode coming soon. This podcast is both on YouTube and Spotify, and you can check out additional resources at veronicakballet.com. See you next time, dancers.